Always a good place to start. Aleph. Okay. Aleph, Poda, besholom. First of all, just the question in the pasuk itself, we have to make sure that we understand that question, remember that question. Poda, besholom, nafshi, mikravli, kibarabim, hayu imadi. Leave the end of the pasuk off at this point, even though that seems to be the reason. But maybe we'll talk about that later in the Maimon. But just the first 5 words in the pasuk seem to be somewhat difficult to understand, because it says mitzad echad Poda besholom, that I've been redeemed in shalom, in a state of shalom. Nafshi, my soul, mikravli, from the battle. Now the li is, as we said, the li is not the battle that was to me. It's Poda besholom li mikrav. Okay, there was a Poda shalom for my soul, nafshi li, to me, mikrav. That's generally how Chassidus understands the pasuk. You could learn it different ways. That's generally how Chassidus understands the pasuk. So the question arises as to if it's shalom, so then what's the krav? What's the battle? Okay, so in the first ice in the Maimon, the Rebbe explained 3 different levels of P'diyah b'sholem, the time of Shalom HaMelech, the first kuf of Mashiach, and the second kuf of Mashiach. That was the first ice in the Maimon. The second ice in the Maimon, the Rebbe explains the difference between Tefillah and Torah. Right? That Torah is Poda b'sholem. That's, and the word the Rebbe uses isn't so much shalom. Once he starts talking about it, he talks about menucha, right? That when you're sitting and learning Torah, you're bringing about a biur, you're bringing about a rectification of reality, but in a calm way, because you're not directly encountering the reality you're elevating. You're just talking about it, you're learning about it, but it's not in your living room, right? We've said it 20 times, right? The shore and the pada, the ox and the cow that you're talking about, that the ox is goring the cow, well, that's not happening in your living room. It's happening in some conceptual place, some conceptual field that you're learning about in the Gemara RBKaplan. Okay, so, but what are you doing? You're elevating that state of reality to a state of Kedusha, because it's part of Torah. Okay, so there's that aspect of Torah. That's b'menucha. You don't have to be, the language of the Rebbe was, you don't have to be mislavesh in that which you are elevating. The language of the Maimer, the mevarer, the one bringing about the birur, doesn't have to be mislavish in the mitbarer, in that which is being rectified. Okay, fine. Tefillah, on the other hand, tefillah is a direct encounter with the Nefesh Bahamis. You have to be mislavish in the Nefesh Bahamis in order to get the Nefesh Bahamis to daven, because that's who's davening. Conscious me is davening, so I have to get I'm encountering conscious me directly. Conscious me being my Nefesh Bahamis. And that's a battle. Right? Okay, that's what the Rebbe said in Ois Beis. In Ois Gimel, the Rebbe talks about 2 different types of learning, Nigla and Pnimius. And of those 2 different levels, Nigla is more an involvement in physical reality, and Pnimius is less of an involvement. It's a simple pshat, right? And Pnimius is less an involvement in physical reality. What are you talking about in Pnimius? God. What are you talking about in Nigla? Oxen. Right? Sheep going through open gates, right? Gazlonim and Ganavim and Tainei Sheker and Edim Zemamim and all sorts of stuff that isn't necessarily so godly. Well, okay, the action that person did is certainly not a godly action, but learning about it is, right? But you're still involved in physical reality and aware of physical reality, right? Whereas Pnimis Torah, it's all about the Eibishter, so it's much calmer in terms of my encounter of that which I'm trying to elevate. Okay, so that was Ois Gimel. In Ois Dalet, the Rebbe said even the way we learn Pnimius and Nigla is different. Nigla, the way Nigla is taught to us, the way Gemara, Talmud Bavli, more than Talmud Yerushalmi, the way Talmud Bavli was written, that's what we sit and learn all day. The way Talmud Bavli was written, it's not that Ravina and Ravashi sat down and wrote a summary of the decisions made in the Batei Midrashis in Babel for the last 300 years. So they did it all. They wrote down the meetings of the minutes of the meetings that were happening in the Batei Midrashis in Babel of over 300 years. So they discussed the whole conversation. Some people who just started learning that thing called Gemara. I understand. If we don't paskin like Abaya, so why do we care about his position? Well, that's true in Shulchan Aruch. That's not true in Talmud Bavli. Talmud Bavli is all about the discussion. Talmud Bavli is all about telling us what happened in the Beis Medrash in Pumbedisa, or in Surah, or in the Hardai, right? Or in Mechaiza, if you happen to be talking about Rava, right? But we want to know what's going on in the Beis Medrash. The conclusion, an afterthought if it's even there. Right? It's often not even there. The Rishonim, some Rishonim will spend a great deal of time explaining the conceptual underpinnings of what's going on. Other Rishonim will try to explain the sugya lahalacha. Right? And ultimately, you'll end up in a Shulchan Aruch 1,000 years after the Gemara was written, was edited and written by Ravina and Ravashi. So then you'll have a book called, Tur before Shulchan Aruch, and the Tur will take all of the information of the Rishonim from the time of the Rif all the way up to the Tur's father, the Rosh. He'll take all of that information and he'll organize it all lahalacha. Right? And then the Shulchan Aruch will actually write down a halacha. Do this, don't do that. Right? 1,000 years after Talmud Bavli, until we got, the Rambam of course did it. Right? Rambam did it in only 600 years after Talmud Bavli. Rambam decided it would be a good idea for us to know what the halacha is after learning all that. Okay, so but Talmud Bavli isn't the book of halacha. I mean, it is, but it isn't. We happen to be finishing a sugya today. We're at the end of the sugya. What's it going to say? Hilchas this and Hilchas that, depending on what kind of date tree you're talking about. Okay, Aramean date trees, Persian date trees. You learn so much interesting information about the botany also. If you're learning a page of Gemara, you have to know everything. Okay, Beseder. So it's the Gemara is a battle, and when people sit down and learn it, so they're battling it out. There's a question, there's an answer, statement, question, answer, proof. Right, the 4 things that happen in the Gemara, and of those 4, what's completely and totally hands down the least common thing said? Statement, question, answer, proof. Of those 4, proof. Almost never. Right? Very rarely do you run into a proof in the Gemara. What do you run into? Statements, questions, and answers. Right? And almost immediately after every statement, there's a question. Right? Most questions have answers. Some don't. Some questions are what's called the kasha nitzachas. They're successful questions, meaning they successfully, and in the language of the Rebbe, they successfully kill the position they were meant to kill. Because the Rebbe talks about it as in terms of shedding blood. That's Talmud Bavli. That's Nigla, right? Okay. Gemara is a battlefield. Talmud Bavli. Chassidus. There's no battles. There'll be questions. There's always questions, but the questions are just to understand things. It's not. I'm not negating the validity of something that I read. I'm asking questions relative to an attempt to understand what I just read. It's very different than Abai asking a question on Rava. When Abai asks a question on Rava or vice versa, they're trying to completely negate the position of the one they're questioning. Right? And that's most questions in Talmud Bavli, not all, because there's boy mines and boy lahus and boy rav papa v'chuli, which are halacha questions. I'll give you the case, you give me the halacha. Right? I don't understand the halacha in this case. Okay, there's questions like that. Right, but most, and that would be like a question in a Maimer Chassidus. I don't understand this. Let's try to understand. Right? As opposed to trying to completely destroy the validity of a position, which is what goes on in Talmud Bavli. So that's Dalid. In Hay, the Rebbe told us, we saw this yesterday, 2 different levels in Panemius. In Panemius Satar itself, there's 2 different levels. There's the level of the Panemius Satar that we learn now, and that's Havana Basaga. That's something that we understand intellectually. And there's the level of learning Panemius Satar that will be B'Yemei Mashiach, and that is we will see the godliness that we're learning about. It won't be an intellectual comprehension. It'll be an experience of godliness. And that will happen in the second Tekuf of Mashiach. Right? Okay. That's what we've learned up until Vav. Now we started Vav yesterday, but we're going to start Vav again today. And we're going to see how these 3 levels of peace, which are what? What are the 3 levels of peace?
It's Mashiach 1, Mashiach 2.
B'diuk. Shlomo, Mashiach 1, Mashiach 2. Right? No offense, that's not a deep, sophisticated idea that is impossible to remember. I mean, it's fairly straightforward. I have to understand that there's two Tekufas in Mashiach. Okay, Beseder, but that's what we learned. So there are. Okay. Shlomo Melech, Mashiach 1, Mashiach 2. And those somehow correspond. That's what the Rebbe is going to say right at the beginning, but already, even before we run into Izvav, we're sort of, that's interesting. There were 3 different levels of Torah, and there were 3 different levels of Sholem. I wonder if there's a connection. Well, you would sort of assume so, right? And what's the connection? Well, there's going to be Nigla and 2 levels of Pneumius, right? Those are the 3 levels of Torah, and somehow that's going to correspond, we assume, to Shlomo, Mashiach Aleph, Mashiach Beis. Right? How? Okay, that's Izvav. That's the Rebbe's going to explain. Alpi kol hanal, based on everything else everything we've learned up until now. Yesh levar, we could explain as follows: Dahagam shinin Poda besholom, that even though the idea of Poda besholom hayagam b'mei Shlomo was also in the days of Shlomo Melech, Ois Vav on page Kuf Pei Dalet, top of the page. Right? Even though the Indian of Poda besholom was also in the time of Shlomo Melech, Mikol Mokem, nevertheless, Hashleimus the Bezen. This is review. Hashleimus shebezeh, the ultimate wholeness of this will be when Yeh b'meis Mashiach, in the days of Mashiach, ubi b'meis Mashiach Gufa, and in the days of Mashiach themselves, b'tkufa base, in the second Tkufa, which again can happen up to 40 years after the actual revelation of Mashiach, building of the Beis Hamikdash, etc. Right? The Rebbe does point out pretty clearly, and not pretty explicitly, numerous times, that certain tzaddikim will come back into Eilam Hazeh with Tchias HaMesim immediately upon the revelation of Mashiach. Meaning, you want to know who Rabbi Akiva is? Okay, probably day 1 of Mashiach, Rabbi Akiva is going to be walking around. You'll be able to meet Rabbi Akiva. Right? Shmerel, the tailor from some little town in Moldova. So it might be up to 40 years before Shmerel shows up again, right? Because there's going to be a line up there waiting to come back down. But the tzaddikim will come down right away. Right? Rabbi always talks about the fact that Frierdiker Rabbi will be right away. Right? But he says all the tzaddikim. Okay. So it's going to be pretty boring up there in Gan Eden with all the tzaddikim down here. Right? Who's going to forbring on Shabbos? But it's good, because when the rabbis leave, so then the congregants have to get it together and start doing things that they might not have been able to do before, but they realize they can. Say it, Russia, Verbreng. What's going to happen in Shul? Go to Shul, Avram Avinu's gone, Yitzchak's gone, Yaakov's gone, they're all gone. Where's everybody? All these empty seats at the front. Where's everybody? They're down in Eilam Hazeh, gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Tuck, I heard Mashiach came. Okay. What's going to be? Who's davening today? Hold on. You're going to daven? Okay. Say it. It says here that Rabbi Akiva is supposed to daven. Say it. He's not here. You'll daven. Be very excited. The Yesh Leimar, Shegimam Darges Elu, these 3 levels, Bisholin, and here they are, B'mei Shleimer, B'tkufa Aleph, B'mei Mashiach, U'b'tkufa Beis. That was very kind to us and doesn't expect us to remember that. Heim Dugmas, Gimel Darges and Al B'Torah. They correspond to those 3 different levels in Torah. And this is what we were learning yesterday when we got stuck. Ve'inyan hu, D'zeh Shem Malchus Shva. Shammai Shema Shlomo, that which the Queen of Sheba, right? Malchus Shva. She heard about the fame of Shlomo Melech. She heard about the greatness of Shlomo Melech. Now, how did that happen? Well, she was in wherever she was in Shvaz, again, somewhere Central Africa, somewhere, right? And Shlomo Melech was sitting in Yerushalayim. But everybody had heard of Shlomo Melech, and everybody knew about Shlomo Melech, and everybody knew about the Yidden, and they had this temple, and they all used to come to the temple to bring sacrifices, etc. So she heard about him. Hu al yedei sheshmei, his name, his fame. D'shem hu ha'ara, it's an illumination, meaning he's sitting there, he's the sun, so to speak, sitting in Yerushalayim, and his light is emanating outward. Nimshach v'nispashet is drawn and spreads. L'merchokim, to distant places. The root of the word rachok is rachok. Ad la'aretz Shva, until this land called Shva, which is wherever it is, Ethiopia area. Sheshleimer atzmei hayabim keimer. Shleimer himself was sitting in Yerushalayim. Vashem Shalei, but his name and his fame, Shema Shleimer, Nimshach v'giel Shva, that reached Shva. Oh, so now the Rebbe says, and this is, I think, the last line we actually read. So, and to the extent that this energy is being drawn to a further place, it's obviously being diminished. Right? The farther away from Yerushalayim you get, the less people will know Bepnimius about Shlomo Melech. They might have heard of him, but who he is, what he is, it'll be a little less. Like light will get a little less strong and less strong and less strong as it distances itself from its source. And that's why you and I are very lucky to be 93 million miles away from the sun, because if we're any closer, we'd fry like a piece of toast in about -2 seconds. Okay, so 93 million miles, that sounds right. 94 million miles would be pieces of ice in about 2 seconds. Okay, so this is just right. It's funny how it happened that way. Okay, it's just right. So too, the light of Shlomo Melech is going to diminish as it gets farther away. That means its effect on reality is going to be less powerful. Okay, that makes sense. And therefore what? Also, in this fashion, also relative to the rectification that's being brought about there by virtue of Shlomo Melech. How positively is Shlomo Melech affecting that state of reality? Well, there is some effect because they've heard of Shlomo Melech. And I assume when they've heard of Shlomo Melech, they've heard of someone who's a holy, holy king who built the Beis Hamikdash, etc. Right? They're not hearing that. They're not hearing shtus. Okay, so they're hearing about Shlomo Melech. So that brings about a certain birur. Limited. But if you really want to know about Shlomo Melech, what are you going to do if you live in Shva? You go, right? Well, that's what she did, right? You have to do that. Right? Even after she heard about Shlomo Melech. Now, obviously, she heard enough that she was going to pick herself up and move. So she heard quite a bit. It still wasn't enough to truly bring about a complete birur in her. What did she understand? If I want to reach a higher state, I have to go next to Shlomo Melech. So what did she do? Hutzrach liyos. There has to be the next part of the pasuk. V'tavei Yerushalma. She came to Yerushalayim. Shalicha mishva Yerushalayim. That this traveling, walking from Shva to Yerushalayim, lekech meshech zman v'tircha. Takes time and energy, effort. It wasn't, now you get on a plane, you're there in relatively little time. I don't know how long it took, but it took a while. It took a couple of weeks. And I don't imagine it was the easiest terrain. And if you're coming from Africa to Eretz Yisrael, it's uphill the whole way. You're going up the whole time. It must be hard going uphill. If you're going from Eretz Yisrael to Africa, so then it's downhill. You just put on rollerblades and you just zip downhill. But this is up. If you look at the map, right, Africa's below, so you got to go up. Right? It's like we used to go to California. It was easy. Coming home was hard. Going to California from Canada was easy. Just put on the rollerblades and down we'd go. It's just straight. Right? If you didn't get that, that's okay. V'rakaz nasa bira. And only then was there a bira. And what's that? The Rebbe says something interesting. And that's similar to the bira of the Gal Yudei. It takes effort. You have to move the thing from where it is to where you want it to be. You have to take the cow and make him part of Torah. He's got to come into the Torah. And that's effort. You have to understand the cow and understand what happened and where's the ox and where's the cow and the if you walk into a field and you see an ox who has bloodied horns and you see a mother cow and a baby cow dead on the field there, so now you have an interesting question. Did he gore the mother when the baby was inside, which would be one value? Or did he gore the mother and after the baby came out? Right? That would be a different value, because then he'd be responsible for 2 deaths, 2 animals, as opposed to a slightly more expensive mother. Okay, so it's a Mishnah in Baba Kama. Right? Okay, so what do you do? Oh, yeah, that's the question. Okay, but you have to take... now, you're not going there, right? You're staying in your living room. But the Torah is somehow bringing that reality into you by virtue of the work that you're doing to bring it closer to you. But you're going to have to encounter that reality in its most gashmisdika form. Just one thing about Malchus Shva, we mentioned yesterday, but it's just important to know in terms of the Malchus Shva being a mashal for Galia. So in terms of tefillah, if we were talking about the Aved of tefillah and the beer of tefillah, then that would the mashal for that would be Shlomo Melech going to Shva and bringing her back. Right? That's tefillah. Now you don't have to do that because it's still Torah. It's still happen. The Shlomo Melech doesn't have to move. But the beer is there's a certain battle in the beer relative to the beer where she's found enveloped in Shlomo Melech's light without moving, without any effort, without any tircha. That's going to be pneumius atar. Mashenkin a beer shiyah b'yemesa Mashiach. How's the beer going to work in Yemesa Mashiach? What's going to happen? So now, obviously, the Rebbe can't explain it to us completely and totally such that we'll understand it because we're talking about things that we haven't experienced. So we'll have to have some, it's going to be hard to fully grasp it. But okay. What'll be? And this is the first kufa also. Since there will be a revelation of infinite godly light that's unlimited and that exists before any state of tzimtzum, any state of limiting the light, there's going to be a revelation of unbelievably powerful godly light that it will be impossible not to experience, not to be aware of. You can't not see it. Right? This light is everywhere equally. It's not just that this light is in the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim and it's emanating out from the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. And if you're in Shiva, it's going to be a certain intensity. And if you're in South Africa, it's going to be a less intensity. And if you're in the Antarctic, it's going to be even less intense. No, that light is revealed absolutely everywhere. No creature on earth, no human being, no creature on earth will be unaware of the existence of that light. Whoa. Okay, so that's a pretty serious change in reality. Still not Kufa Beis. We're going to have to understand what the difference of the Rebbe is. That's what the Rebbe is going to explain to us now. The difference between Kufa Aleph and Yemesa Mashiach and the Kufa Beis. And it's very subtle and it's not easy to understand because we're talking about revelation of godly reality, which we've never experienced. We can talk about it intellectually, but I don't know what that looks like exactly. I know what metaphysical reality looks like. Right? Godly reality. Revealed godly reality. The Orzeh B'chol Makom B'Shava. Now, it's B'chol Makom B'Shava now also. Right? Just not revealed. Leis Aser Panim, there is no place devoid of godliness. Everything that exists is just an expression of his existence. But the way it exists now is that it hides the godliness of it. What will happen b'Yemesa Mashiach? It will reveal the godliness in it. Right? I don't know what this would look like, but it would be as if you're looking at this orange and what you would see is the vitamin C. You wouldn't see the orange, you'd see the vitamin C in it. You'd see the panemius of it. Now, obviously, you'd see really the godly reality giving the orange. But we talked about this earlier as a mushal, right? So this orange, right? You know that this orange, that there's something concealed in this orange that you can't see, that is really the aspect of the orange that's most important, and that's why you'd eat the orange. It's called vitamin C, right? There's a level in which you'll eat the orange just because it has some sugars and it will, give you a little boost of energy just because it's food, and food will give you a burst of energy. So rather than go down to the machine downstairs and get something not healthy, you'll get this. Okay, I get that. Right? Okay. But really, Bapnemius, what's in here is called vitamin C. That's what's important that's in this thing. Okay, you can't see it, but it's in there. So imagine if when you looked at an orange, you wouldn't see an orange, you'd see vitamin C, whatever that looks like. Okay. Now, really go a step further, because what's the vitamin C? Well, okay, vitamin C is something in Gashmius is giving you energy in the orange, but we learned in this, we came up, we were talking about this Moshe when we were learning Mayim Rabin. What's the real panemius of this thing? Why do you get energy when you eat this? Because godly energy is giving this thing existence, and you are eating that godly, and literally eating that godly energy. You're taking it into yourself. That's the panemius of the vitamin C. The panemius of the orange, which you can't see, but you can find out in a laboratory what it looks like, right? Because not that it's there, because we can do that in Gashmias. But you and I can't see the vitamin C in here. Okay, but when we eat it, we know we're getting vitamin C. The panemius of that is you and I are getting godly energy that's giving this thing existence. And this weird little nose on top. Right? The godly energy is causing this orange to exist. When you and I eat the orange, we bring into ourselves that godly energy, so it gives us energy. And that's how you and I have to get energy. We can't get energy by sitting and learning Torah and just bringing godly energy down in spiritual terms. We can't do that. Right? There are people who evidently do that better than us. They're called tzaddikim, and so they eat very little and they sleep very little. We talked about that in I'm Robin. But you and I, we can't do that. Right? So what do we have to do? So we have to eat the orange. And the orange gives us energy. Good. Again, the panemius in chitzonius, what's the energy of the orange? The juice and the pulp, which I see and experience and wash off my hands when I'm finished, because that's why most people refrain from eating this. When they see it, they go, oh, an orange would be nice. I just can't deal with being sticky at the end, and I can't deal with it, right? That's why most people won't eat it, right? But it does taste good. Okay, but it's full of all this stuff. So that's the stuff you see. But what's in that? Oh, in that is the vitamin C, which is really the good stuff. What's in that? That's really what this is. That's really what gives you the kaya, right? Vitamin C is just a muscle for that, which is a good muscle, because no one will say there isn't vitamin C in here. No one will say you can see the vitamin C in here. None of us. Take it to a lab. We'll test it. We'll see it. Can't see it here, but we all know it's there. Okay, just go a step further in your sophistication. An unsophisticated person wouldn't know about vitamin C either. There aren't very many of those around. There are Baruch Hashem. There are still some people, but not who are still so unsophisticated they can't even imagine the godliness in it. Again, vitamin C is one step. The Eibishter in it is the next step. Now there's a problem with that step. Can't find that in a lab. So I can, so to speak, prove to you there's vitamin C in this, on some level, right? Prove to you enough that you and I will all come to a conclusion that, there's probably vitamin C in there. Can I prove to you there's elikus in there? No. Not the way I can prove vitamin C. Can I understand the elikus in there? Yeah. B'Yemei Mashiach, am I going to see the elikus in there? Yeah. What's that going to look like? You know what that looks like? I don't know what that looks like. You know what vitamin C looks like? I don't know what that looks like either. Right? Now, maybe if you've worked in a lab, you've seen what vitamin C looks like. Don't know. Right? But I don't know what the godliness that's vitalizing that orange. But in the end, what's that godliness? Ein Sof Shel Lifnei HaTzimtzum is ultimately responsible for the existence of that orange, and that will be revealed in the first kufa of Yemei Mashiach. And as we were talking about, I think it was yesterday, where we mentioned when the Rebbe talked with a smile about the fact that we'll have to learn physics before davening to be sure that we can put the book on the table. And it won't fall on the floor. Because the book and the table, their existence will be something that's less absolutely clear to us. What will be absolutely clear? Godly reality. Just like today, it's the other way around. What's absolutely clear to us? Physical reality. What do we have to contemplate and sensitize ourselves to? Godly reality. Yemei Mashiach will be the other way around. What will be obvious? Godly reality. What will we have to remind ourselves of? Physical reality. Okay, so that's what the Rebbe is saying about Kufa Aleph. So that's very different than learning Nigla. Learning Nigla, you don't have to imagine the existence of the cow. I mean, you have to picture the cow goring the ox goring the cow, but you know what an ox looks like. You know what a cow looks like. That's why the sugyas in Baba Kama aren't so difficult. When you start talking about Tuma and Tara, those sugyas are very difficult. Why? Well, I don't know what it looks like, right? You're talking about this completely conceptual and metaphysical reality that's very hard to understand. I mean, what does Tuma look like? It doesn't look like anything. It's completely metaphysical. And it's not intuitive. It's a chayk. So, but when you're learning Hilchos Shabbos, well, you've all kept Shabbos. Hilchos Shabbos isn't that hard. When you're learning Hilchos Brachos, when does it get hard? When you're learning Gemara Brachos? They're talking about fruits and vegetables. You have no clue what this thing looks like. Right? It says some fruit. What is it? It's a fruit. It's a vegetable. How does it grow? How big is it? What does it look like? So it gets hard to say, oh, you make a borei peri eitz on that. Why? What is it? What is it? If it hit me if someone threw one at me and it hit me in the shoulder, I wouldn't know what it is. Okay, so sometimes that's hard. What's a lupin? Lupins. Gemara Brachos talks about the bracha on lupins and how you cook lupins. And you have to cook them for a long time. Can't eat them until you cook them for a long time. Lupins. What's a lupin? Give me all the lupins you've got. Okay. So that's all nigla. Pnimius? The beer is so simple. Why? Well, because there's this incredible revelation of godly light. It'll be found everywhere equally. The whole world will just be this shining revelation of godliness. It's really going to be quite astounding. Therefore, the rectification of reality. Now, the Rebbe says something very interesting, because clearly this is the way it is now, and we talk about this a lot in Chassidus in terms of our Veda. It's not going to be in a fashion, a way, shel hamshachas, drawing down, v'yeridus, and the descent of a or lamato, of light from above below, drawing light down, just through learning Torah. Va'alosa mizbarer lamaila, and the elevation of that which is being rectified above, right? The traffic up and down, drawing godliness into the world, elevating the world to a higher place, which we talk about a lot in terms of our Veda in Eilam Hazeh. So that is our Veda in Eilam Hazeh. That's the birurim we do in Eilam Hazeh now. Try to draw godly light into the world, reveal godly light in the world, and use physical reality and elevate it back to its source in Elokus. And we talked about the birur that you've done on those pieces of paper, those pieces of paper you're looking at, because they now can't be put in Geniza because you've learned it. Okay, so you brought about a birur and that tree and that, charcoal that goes into making ink, however they make ink. Okay, an incredible birur in that stuff. But that's all milamayla lamata, milamata lamayla, from above below, below above. That's how birurim work now. And there's certain aspects of our Avodah which are all below above. Mitzvahs, elevating things. Learning Torah, drawing godly light down. The Torah is there, godly light's there, just draw it down into the world. Right? Mitzvahs elevate the physical reality by virtue of using it for a positive purpose. Use the time, use the space. Okay. And we can elevate time and space by using it within the context of God's will. It's really quite an amazing thing that God allows us to do. He also allows us to eat hot dogs and burp, if that's what we want to spend our life doing. He's very chilled. Lets you do whatever you want. Ki'im, rather, what's it going to be, B'yemei Mashiach? Sha'or k'meishu yar b'kol makam. The light as it is, unadulterated, unmitzumtzam, light will shine. Aye. How is that not going to obliterate us? Okay, that's God's business, not ours. He knows how to do that. Lo chen az, therefore what will happen? This is the pasuk that the Rambam quotes at the end of Rambam, at the end of the 11th chapter in Rambam, in the Hilchos Malachim, and that we say all the time, Efech el amim, I will transform the nations. And the Rebbe adds in brackets, Kameshem b'mitziusim b'imkerim, as they are. They're going to be the same nations. And they're going to stay where they are. Right? The French will be French, and the Germans will be Germans, and the Somalis will be Somalians, and the Bangladeshis will be Bangladeshis, and Americans will be Americans. I have to do something to the Canadians to fix them up. I know we'll figure something out. And the Australians, Baclau, have to be a revolution over there. Right, the English, the ones who used to be English, but there's someone else, they let someone else take over their whole country, so they don't exist anymore. But okay, they'll come back into existence. Right? They're talking about the English a lot lately. Okay. They'll be where they are, but what? All of them will serve kulam ke'echad. They'll all be together. La'avdei shchem echad, to serve him as one. I'll transform all the nations into a clear language, meaning what will their language be? A language of godliness, not a language of gashmias. Right? Unbelievable. Right? Okay. Certain languages have the ability to explain certain things better than other languages, right? Just the way it is. Right? English is an incredibly expressive language for all sorts of things, right? But if you wanted certain things, you want to describe them in English, it's very limited. Godly reality, harder in English than in Lashon HaKodesh. Lashon HaKodesh, how many names for snow are there in whatever language Eskimos speak? Hundreds of, no, there are. It's very interesting. They have hundreds of different names, not hundreds, but all sorts of different names for snow, right? Well, because they leave snow, right? So there's this kind of snow and that kind of snow and this kind of, right? So they have different, they don't call it snow. You and I call it snow. No, there'll be this snow, which is, little granules, and this, which is big, huge flakes, and this, which is wet snow and dry snow. And beginning of the year, it's wet snow, right? It's not dry. In the middle of the year, there's no wet snow. It's dry. It's so cold, it's fluttering around. Right, barely sticks. Powder, they call it. Skiers call it powder, right? That's what they like to ski in. Right? They can see up to their waist in powder snow. Okay, fine. And that's the colder it gets, the more powdery the snow gets, right? Less water. Okay, fine. So Eskimos have all sorts of different names for snow. Lashon HaKodesh has all sorts of different names for God. All sorts of different ways of expressing godly reality. That's why it's called Lashon HaKodesh. It was good for expressing. English, God. Right? So it's interesting when Moshe Vishnevsky translated the Chumash, so Yud Kei Vav Kei and Eloki. So how did he translate them? God, both. But you have to make a difference. So one is G-O-D, same size letters, all capitals. That's Yud Kei Vav Kei. The other is a capital G and a small O and a small D. That's Elokim. Two different levels of God, different aspects of God. Okay, but in English, just God. Why? Well, it's not a language that's all about explaining godly reality. It's a language that's very, very good at explaining other things, right? But not godly reality. Right? Okay. Can we put away the phone, please? We don't play with phones in class. Right? You all right? No, say that, okay. I'm sure that do something. One thing I know about you, that you're not an idiot, right? And you're not watching some stupid, Simpsons meme or something. That I know. But still, we just don't take our phones in class, right? Because they are probably the single most harmful. This doesn't happen in class, okay? These things don't happen, right? We're adults sitting here, right? We're into this. This is what we're doing. Right? I spend enough time with 18-year-old Lubavitch girls. I have to discipline. It drives me nuts. That's my birur ba'efen shel milchama. This is my birur ba'efen shel menucha v'shalom, because I'm dealing with adults who want to learn Torah. Right? When I, the 18-year-olds, a lot of them are very mature and want to learn Torah, but there's also the other ones, and it's. Some of your most creative moments as a teacher are trying to get people to be quiet and listen, when you're teaching 18-year-olds. Okay. So, Beis Mashiach, the birur is going to be completely calm. It's not going to do anything. It says everything is just going to be in a state of existential birur. Why was God is going to be revealed in such a way that you can't possibly have any issue with the existence of this reality. Right? It's going to be everywhere. So then a question does arise, I think, so then what's the difference between Tekufa Aleph and Tekufa Beis? Like, what's better than that? What could possibly happen in the second Tekufa? If the first Tekufa is already a time of unbelievable revelation, So then, and interesting, we already said there's a difference, right? Because we said, what did we say was the difference between Tekufa Aleph and Tekufa Base relative to our understanding of Panemius Atara? We did say there's a difference. What words did the Rebbe use?
Hearing versus seeing.
Beautiful. Hearing versus seeing. Well done. Right? He didn't say hearing, actually. We did, but you're right. Comprehension, Re'iyah. The first is comprehension. Why is this comprehension? This sounds like experience. I'm going to see it. So how do we explain this relative to the next level? What's the difference between this and the next level? If you understand that at the time of Yemei Mashiach, godliness just because you and I will all become enlightened to the existence of godly reality, but the world will still look like it looks. Okay, I can appreciate that. But I might still have my highs and lows in such a state, right? Times of greater appreciation of it, less appreciation of it. Okay. But if I'm experiencing this unbelievable revelation of infinite godly light, so then what's the next step after that? That's what we're going to see now. Yeah?
You're saying in the first state, we'll know that the table is holiness, but we won't see it?
We'll see it. That's what the Rebbe just said.
Okay.
That's what the Rebbe just said. So that's what, meaning, obviously, that's not the seeing that we're going to have in the third level, right? Which is that's what I don't understand. What's more than that? When the Rebbe was talking yesterday, when we told the story about the Rebbe saying you're going to have to learn to physics, so to speak, to remind yourself that you. So you could now say that about the first kufa, the way the Rebbe just described the first kufa. Right? When we talked about it yesterday, we said, I guess the Rebbe's talking about the second. But now we just saw what we saw. Godliness is going to be revealed completely to everyone. Wow. It'll be impossible to make a mistake regarding the existence of Elokus the same way anybody who's of sound mind can't make a mistake right now about the existence of this table. Again, they can talk about the philosophical reality of does it exist, but bottom line, what anybody of sound mind who walks into this room, what are they going to see? Tables and chairs. And if you ask them what's in the room, they'll say there's a bunch of tables and chairs in the middle and there's books on the side. And if they don't say that, then they're not a healthy person. Because that's reality. That's the reality we experience, and we all experience it the same way. There's that fascinating idea, and it's true. It's very fascinating, but we can never get to the bottom of it. Is what exactly do you see when you walk in the room? Well, I don't know. Right? What does the color blue look like? I don't know what you see when you see blue. I know what I see when I see blue. You and I were sitting in grade 2 together. It doesn't have to be probably before grade 2, but we'll say it was grade 2. And the teacher taught us, she held up something, he held up something, and said, this is blue. Okay. Now for the rest of my life, I've described what the teacher held up as blue. What do you see when you see that? I have no idea. You might see what I call green. I have no idea what you see. But you call that blue because that's what your experience was at that moment of seeing that stuff. The teacher held it up and said, this is blue. And you said, okay, that's blue. And forever you call that blue. So I will call Yosef's shirt blue. Everybody in this room will call Yosef's shirt blue. Do we see the same thing when we look at Yosef's shirt? Can't possibly ever know. Which is fascinating. Can't possibly ever know whether we're seeing the same thing. Because it might be when Gershon looks at the shirt, he sees what I'll call green. But he'll call it blue because that's what the teacher held up and called blue. And everybody calls what Gershon sees as green blue. So he'll call it blue. He doesn't call it green. Why would he call it green? It's blue. And what does blue look like? I can't describe blue to you. Blue's not an idea. Blue is a visual experience. I can't possibly explain that to you. It's so interesting. Right? Now, I assume we all see the same thing, right? There's no reason to think we don't, but who knows? Can't prove it. Right? Which is just interesting about the reality that we perceive. But that being said, when we walk into the room, we'll all say there's tables in the middle and chairs around. Okay, what will be Mesa Mashiach? What are we all going to see in this room? Godly reality. As obvious as this, we're going to see godliness wherever we go. Wow, that's going to be cool. sort of makes you want to help bring Mashiach, no? Okay. Let's go a little further. Elo. Now the Rebbe says something which we'd love him to explain to us. And this is a very, very subtle point, because obviously we're talking about the godly reality, but I think we can understand it. Because after all, what are we saying? Just like there are 3 levels of shalom, there's 3 levels of Torah, right? So there's 3 levels of birurim. So there's the birur of Nigla, that's like Shlomo Melech. Malcha Shva has to come all the way from where she is to where he is, because it's a battle. It's not a battle relative to Tefillah, but it's relative to Pneumius. It's a battle. There's effort involved. Okay. Then there's Yemais Mashiach. What's Yemais Mashiach? The sun is shining as bright in Shva as it is in Yerushalayim. She doesn't have to leave Shva. God is as revealed in Shva as he is in Yerushalayim. Right? Unbelievable revelation. It's instant. On a certain level, it's emanating from Yerushalayim, but you wouldn't experience it that way. Right? The same way today, just an interesting point in halacha. Why is it that when you eat wheat that was grown in the Ukraine or in Minnesota, you make a meitzi on the bread, and then you bench, and the second bracha in benching, at the end of it, you say, V'achaltu v'savatu v'rachta esavai l'kecha la'aretz hatov v'sher nosan lach. Right? You ate, and you were satisfied, and you blessed God for the good land that he gave you. What good land did he give you? What?
Yeah, it's interesting.
What land did he give you?
Israel.
Eretz Israel. So why are you high of the bench if you're eating wheat grown in Minnesota or the Ukraine?
Yeah.
Europeans eat wheat grown, I don't know what they do now, but I mean, they used to eat wheat grown in the Ukraine. Most of the wheat in Europe came from the Ukraine. And most of the wheat in America comes from, Minnesota, that area. All the wheat in Canada comes from Saskatchewan, right? Okay. So why am I saying, how much wheat do we grow here in Eretz Israel? Very little. Right? Even here in Eretz Israel, we're eating wheat I assume most of the wheat is imported. So I don't think there's enough. You ever see any wheat fields around here? I mean, you don't see them. Right? Okay. So why do we say that? Interesting question, huh? Brat la'alocha. I mean, are you chayav to bench in Chutz La'aretz? Why isn't benching a mitzvah, one of the mitzvahs of Tluyas Ba'aretz? Just like Trumas and Meisers. What? The Zohar answers the question. The Zohar says an amazing thing. All of the bracha of the Yibshter comes into the world, derech, through Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael, and then as a portion to the rest of the world from there. So when you make a bracha on bread that was made from wheat grown in Minnesota, you are making a bracha based on wheat that derives the source of its bracha from Eretz Yisrael. That's what the Zohar says about wheat. Why that doesn't apply to the apple, so you have to take Trumas and Meisros, I don't know. That's an interesting question. We're not going there. But relative to wheat, that's what the Zohar says about wheat. Manyan? Okay. So now, that why am I saying that? Well, in terms of what we're learning about, Shlomo Melech is sitting in Yerushalayim, and this energy is going out from Yerushalayim and affecting the outer realms. But not in such a revealed way, ad kedei kach, that they are completely enveloped in the same light he's enveloped in. So what does Malchus Shva have to do? Come to him. So that's like the beer of Nigla, right? And that's before Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, what's going to be obvious? Mashiach comes, you're going to somehow understand on some level, just using the wheat as the mashal. When you harvest wheat in Minnesota, it's going to be screaming out Eretz Israel to you because it's all the same. There's no difference between the wheat in Minnesota and the wheat in Eretz Israel. It's not that it's deriving its bracha through these channels that somehow go from this place called Eretz Israel down to this place called Minnesota. Right? And there's a metaphysical difference between Eretz Israel and Minnesota. Right? That's why Eretz Israel is called there. It's a Kodesh, it's a holy place, and Minnesota is normal every day. Elam Hazeh, right? Okay, what's the difference al pi chassidus? Whether or not the energy that's powering that place is coming from Elam Yitzira, that's Eretz Israel, or Elam Asiyah, that's the rest of the world, right? Okay. It's all Olam. I say it's still a physical world, but where's the energy coming from? So in Eretz Yisrael, it's coming from a higher place in Elokus. It's less miluvash. It's less garments, more revealed. Okay, that's why it's more mitzvahs, right? More expression of God's will, more revealed expression of God's will here. There's more revelation of God here. That's the nature of Eretz Yisrael. It's a special place. Okay. That takes a certain amount of sensitivity to be aware of that, right? Because it's not so obvious. Okay, be a Mesa Mashiach. Well, it'll be obvious that Eretz Yisrael is special, but the whole rest of the world is also in this place of unbelievable revelation. Okay. But what about Tkufa base? What's the difference? The Betkufa Rishayna Le'yechidish b'maisa bereshis. There's not going to be anything new, anything novel in creation itself. In other words, things are all going to work the way they work. You want wheat, you're going to have to plant it. You're going to be aware of the godliness of the kernel of wheat that you're planting and the godliness of the wheat growing in your field. Both the godliness of the fact that it's growing and the godliness of the wheat that is growing, right? You're going to be aware of the Eibishter in everything happening in a very, very, very powerful way. You're going to see it, so to speak, even though we have to be careful when you use that word, because we said that was shaykh to the second Tekufa. The revelation of godliness that will be in the world. The Rebbe says something very, very interesting. It'll be in terms of the revelation of an infinite godly light, shemeir b'chol olam, that is going to shine in all places. But it's not going to be an expression of the world itself. The world itself is not going to be, so to speak, the world. This way. The world will be the place where that level of godliness is revealed, but the world itself will not be transformed into revealed godliness yet. Meaning, you will be aware of the fact that when you walk into this room, you'll be aware of the godliness in the room, and you'll be aware of the fact that the table exists by virtue of the godliness imbued in it. But the table's still going to be a table. So then we're back to our first understanding of the Rebbe. No, we're still going to know the table's a table. We're going to know the table's a table. We're going to put the book on the table, but we're not going to appreciate the table as something separate from the Eibishter. We'll appreciate the table as existent by virtue of the godliness imbued in it. But I'm still going to experience the table as a table. I'm going to experience Olam Hazeh as Olam Hazeh. But what am I going to be aware of? The godliness in Olam Hazeh, but not in it, so to speak, all around. Very subtle difference, right? But we have to, it's hard for us to appreciate it because what does godliness look like? Okay. But we're not going to, so to speak, see godliness emanating out of the world. We're going to see godliness in the world. Yeah? Kufa base? Be a whole different experience. Let's see. We'll keep reading. Let's see. The world itself will be a place, like a kli, where godliness is revealed. And it will be revealed. And no one's going to make a mistake. No one's going to write books about, philosophical books about whether God exists or not, or try to figure out how he doesn't. Those days are over. Okay? But is physical reality going to look different to you and I? Well, yes, to the extent that our conscious reality does affect how we see things, but in terms of seeing it, there'll be a physical table here, sitting here. Just you and I won't have any doubts whatsoever of the fact that everything that exists in this room exists because God created it. And that godly light will be revealed to us, but not so much in the book, just in some sort of general sense. Okay, now you can't say it's out here and not in there. It's everywhere. But there'll be no doubt about the existence of the Kadosh Baruch Hu in anybody's mind or heart. But will physical reality still look the same? Yes. Will you have to plant a seed in order to get an apple tree? Yeah. It's still going to work the same way. Just you'll experience it all in Pneumius. Meaning, it'll be similar to an enlightened person today, a tzaddik today. How does he experience reality? Very similar to that first kufa of Mashiach. What does he see everywhere? Elokus. When he looks at you, what does he see? Elokus. When he doesn't see you, he sees you. There's a you. He knows what you look like. He'll remember you when you walk by the second time. But he doesn't experience you and me like you and I experience you and me. Experiences you and I in terms of, you and me, in terms of the panemius of us. But he sees the chitzonius. The chitzonius is the same. He could draw a picture of the chitzonius. Same way an artist, if he could draw. Okay. And it's interesting because the Rebbe said about the Frierdiker Rebbe. When the Rebbe used to verbring, and the Rebbe used to verbring 3 times a year during the days of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Right? That doesn't mean he would be around, but he would official verbring. Right? So I think it was Simchas Torah, Beis Nisan, maybe at this case, I'm not sure. It was the 3rd time also. Rebbe verbring, 3 verbringings a year. So evidently, obviously I wasn't around, the Rebbe used to say, the Shver had Mashiach in the cupboard. My Shver has Mashiach in the cupboard. My father. What's the problem? It's not on Kingston Avenue or Eastern Park. But you go by the Shver, what's there? Mashiach. It's Mashiach by the Shver. Okay. But what? It hasn't gone anywhere else. What's Mashiach is that consciousness will exist everywhere. It won't just be by the Shver. But that's what Rabbi used to say about his about the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Shver had Mashiach in the cupboard. The Shver has Mashiach in the cupboard. By the Shver, it's Mashiach. Right? Now, interesting enough, what experience did many people have when they would be in the presence of our Rebbe? An experience where the physicality of the world really didn't interest them, and they all of a sudden were interested solely in godly pursuit. Right? Now, does that mean that they experienced physical reality differently? Well, on some level, but no. I mean, it was still there. They still knew their shoes were still too tight. If they bought shoes that were too tight, it's not like all of a sudden they stopped being too tight. Right? But they were just focused on something else completely. Right? Standing completely crunched on one foot because you only have enough room to put one foot on the floor. There's not enough room for you to put 2 feet on the floor. And you're standing there for 4.5 hours listening to the Rebbe verbring. So there will be moments where you're feeling your foot. But there'll also be moments where you're completely unaware of the fact that you're standing on one foot and your left leg sort of hurts because it's been there for a while and you're just in another place. You're interested in your conscious reality is somewhere else. What are you interested in? I don't know. I remember Rabbi Vichman once describing the only time in his life he ever experienced, and he was just describing something that I think a lot of people experienced, right? That the only time in his life he ever experienced having complete and total focus on one thing and one thing only. That was the only thing that existed in all of reality. There was nothing else. What was that? When you're singing a niggin by the Rebbe and the Rebbe wants the niggin louder. The Rebbe goes like this. The only thing that exists is singing that niggin louder. You're transported to a different place. You don't have feet, you don't have hands, you don't have anything. Now they're there. The only thing that matters at that moment is singing that niggin with more energy. So he wants to describe. And I think if people experience that moment, I don't think that was something unique just to Rabbi Vichman. There was something fairly common to people in that situation, right? Which is a very, very special experience because you'd like to draw on that experience. You'd like to actually experience that every time you sit down in front of a sefer to learn Torah. You'd like to experience that every time you're sitting and talking to another human being, that your whole focus is on that conversation and on the well-being of that human being. That's what everybody says they felt like when they walked by the Rebbe, right? It's always, you do that, not everybody, but I mean, when you hear people describe what it means to walk by the Rebbe, just for dollars, what do they all say? It was like there was only 2 people in all of reality, me and the Rebbe. There's someone who just walked by 10 seconds before and someone who's going to come 10 seconds after. It doesn't matter. People always felt, which is interesting. But they were getting that from the Rebbe, not from themselves. Okay, so that's a taste of such a reality where you're aware of physical reality, but you're also conscious of something that's completely transcendent of that. So that's the first kufa. Let's just finish up quickly. Mashenkin kufa shniya. No, sorry. We have to read the brackets. Because the world's going to continue existing the way it is. You know what? It's late. We'll stop now. I don't want to rush to the end. We'll see the end tomorrow. The second part. Right? So there's that first part where I'm aware of the world, but my conscious reality is completely and totally focused on godly reality. Why? Well, because that's what's revealed. But that doesn't mean the world disappears. There's still a world. What's evidently the second kufa is going to be something different. We'll see what that is tomorrow.
Yeah.
Hopefully by then we'll have started the first kufa. So we won't have to learn about the first kufa. We'll experience the first kufa. And then we can learn about the second one and go, wow, that's really amazing. That's going to be better than this. Phew. But that's up to us. What does that mean? Kabbalah's Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu. That's what the Rebbe says you have to do. Everything else has been done.
What is there a chance or whatever that will come down? See that already? The first half.
We can go back up. It doesn't go once it's here, it's here.
So it's not like it's like it's thought we're ready and we're proving that.